When did Pioneer DJ start? It pretty much started with the first CDJ. Which one? And when? Well, there's a handful of images going around where several CDJ models are listed on a chart, and it points to the CDJ 300 as being released in 1992. In fact, recently, there's even been a video reel being passed around where it's swiping each model, starting with the CDJ 300, labeled 1992. The caption even says 30 years of CDJs. However, if we go back to May of 2014, Pioneer DJ released a video celebrating its 20-year anniversary and talking about the first CDJ and mentioning that it started with the CDJ 500.
Pioneer contacted me and I sat down with them and they were working on introducing the CD player.
And if Pioneer DJ released the CDJ 300 in 1992, why wasn't there a 20-year anniversary in 2012? So which one is it? Which came first, the CDJ 500 or the CDJ 300? The first CDJ was in fact the CDJ 500, which premiered in October 1994. At the time of this video, the CDJ product line is 28 years old. So there you have it, it was 1994. Hold on just a second. The original CDJ 500 was released only to the Asian and European markets. The first CDJ in the United States was indeed the CDJ 300, which came out in 1995, in under a year after the CDJ 500. So you can understand where this confusion comes from. But how did the CDJ 300 get mislabeled as a 1992 release? We'll deep dive into the history of both the image and the CDJs, but first a word from our sponsor. This video is brought to you by Direct Music Service. Check out the description or the pinned comment below for discount codes. This ongoing meme of a chart of CDJs with the CDJ 300 mislabeled as 1992 actually started as far back as the time of the MySpace days. I actually clearly remember this and having it seed in my head because it was my first time learning about the CDJ 300. I remember this because this was a time in my life I was kind of skipping class and sitting in the computer lab of the college library looking up DJ gear. My social media at the time was MySpace, Asian Avenue, and DJ forums. Now, I don't have a copy of the original image, but basically, just to describe it, it basically charted all the releases of the CDJs and related players at the time. Pretty much every model before the CDJ 2000 was released. Unlike a game of telephone, on the internet, a rumor can live on forever. As newer CDJs were released, the chart would get updated or even redesigned, even turned into a video, and on it went through the course of about 20 years. With the incorrect mislabeling of the CDJ 300. If I were to speculate how this thing started, my theory is someone from the United States probably remembered the CDJ 300 as the first. Then he found research that the CDJ 500 came out in 1994, confused it with the later models like the CDJ 500 II or the limited edition, subtracted 2 years, and voila, the CDJ 300 legend of 1992 is born. And I have to admit to you, I myself was guilty of perpetuating this mislabeling in a video I had posted that I have since removed years ago. The CDJ 300 could be the actual first CDJ that has been forgotten. But that video led me to do some research because I really wanted to know, did the CDJ 300 really come out in 1992? Why has no one from Pioneer DJ talked about this? You see, what's difficult about the early to mid 90s is that there wasn't the internet as we know it today. There was really no social media or digital cameras, and we were still several years away from DJ gear manufacturers hosting a website to advertise their products. And with the differences in releases in different regions, information could easily get convoluted. And while I myself have seen several CDJ 500 variants through my childhood and teens, I never actually came across the CDJ 300. So leaping from that video I had made earlier, I reached out to CDJ 300 owners to ask what their manufacturing dates were. To my shock, it was showing production dates between 1995 and 1997. As I dug more, I could not find one earlier than 1995. So then I turned to the official Pioneer DJ website on the product archive page, and the oldest CDJ listed there is the CDJ 500 II, also known as the CDJ 500 Mark II. No mention of the 1 or the CDJ 300, but we do know they exist because you can find them on eBay. In my digging, it turns out the CDJ 500 came out first. The CDJ 300, which was the more affordable version, came out the following year in 1995, and it was the first CDJ in the United States. The 300 came out the same year as the first DJM mixer, which was the DJM 500. So whenever you see this image passed around, just know that the CDJ 300 actually came out in 1995, not 1992. So what's the difference between the two? Let's start with the CDJ 500. While it wasn't technically the first tabletop DJ CD player, it was unique in the sense that it allowed DJs who normally would use turntables to be able to integrate the CDJ alongside and be able to add compact disc media to their workflow. You see, if you're a DJ in 1994, it was either you used vinyl on turntables or you played CDs on a 19-inch rack-mounted dual DJ CD player, or sometimes two single DJ CD players. And you would often use it with a 19-inch mixer. Don't worry, I didn't forget you guys who used tape decks. Shout out to you if you did. And while digital audio was more consistent in audio quality, vinyl DJs were nowhere close to letting their favorite medium go, simply because of the amount of control you had over the music when spinning on real vinyl records. The CDJ 500 had a shape that was friendlier to placement alongside of turntables. You could place them inside or outside or floating above at an angle. The modularity gave DJs options. Now the tiny 2-inch jog wheels of dual CD players of the time with no vinyl emulation kept DJs sticking to the beloved vinyl format. What the CDJ 500 did was that it freed DJs from the limitations of the dual rack mount CD player. Don't get me wrong, it never replaced the turntable in any significant way, but it was more of a digital companion to the turntable. The play button was in the same spot as the turntable, and the pitch tempo slider was as long as the ones found on turntables. While the popularity of burning your own CD didn't take off until the end of the decade, there was still an ease for producers to play their own music without waiting for it to be pressed on vinyl. And burning a CD was generally a lot cheaper than pressing something on vinyl. Now, unlike CDJs today, the jog wheel of the CDJ 500 didn't let you scratch or do spinbacks. That came later on the CDJ 1000 in 2001. While the CDJ 500's jog was significantly bigger than on dual CD players, the manipulation was still limited to only tempo bending and stutter cue. If you want to know what it's like to play on the CDJ 500, simply disable vinyl mode on any modern CDJ. Despite lacking vinyl emulation, it had some pretty awesome tech for 1994, and a lot of these features were things you can't do using real vinyl. It had a digital key locking feature called Master Tempo, which retained the pitch when you move the tempo slider. It also had a single amber seamless loop button. Unlike the two amber loop buttons you see today on modern Pioneer DJ gear, the loop button on the CDJ 500 was actually a loop out button. The loop in is wherever you set the cue point with the cue button. You could loop up to a 7-minute range within a single compact disc. The cue button, or temporary cue button it's sometimes called, wasn't like how you know it today. When you hold the button, it lets you hear up to 10 seconds. Today, if you hold the button, it will play the whole track indefinitely. This feature of being able to hold down the cue and listen from your cue point was then called the cue sampler. Oh, and in case you're wondering, the CDJ 500 was equipped with fader start, which allowed you to play the track when you move the crossfader on the DJM 500 mixer. You had to hook up the fader start TRS cables. And if you're enjoying this video right now, please click that subscribe button and that bell icon so you see more videos like this one. So what about the CDJ 300? What was different about it? Well, in a nutshell, it was pretty much identical to the CDJ 500, except it lacked the loop function. You can tell the two apart because one doesn't have the loop button. In regions where they were both available, the CDJ 300 was indeed the lower cost version. If you ever look at the history of CDJs, the flagship model always came out first, followed by the more affordable version. The CDJ 1000 came out before the CDJ 800, and the CDJ 2000 came out before the CDJ 900. So looking in retrospect, it wouldn't make any sense for the CDJ 300 to predate the CDJ 500. And here's another thing unique to that time period. The CDJ model numbers weren't all the same in different regions. The CDJ 500, as it was known in Europe and Asia, was a CDJ 50 in Japan. The CDJ 300 released in the United States was known as the CDJ 30 in Japan, and this went on for several of these first generation models. But the wildest one was the CDJ 500S, as it was known to most of the world, but it was labeled the CDJ 700S in the United States. So let's talk about the overall timeline of these first generation CDJs. I'm only going to mention the biggest key feature of each, but let me know in the comment section below if you're down to see another video like this one on these classic models. In 1994, the CDJ 500 was released to the European and Asian market with the identical CDJ 50 in Japan. In 1995, the CDJ 300, the near identical but loop-free version of the CDJ 500, is released in the United States with the CDJ 30 in Japan. Also in 1995, the CDJ 500G is released to the US market only, which supported CDJ G media, which was basically karaoke CDs. This was the first CDJ with loop in the American market, but slightly different specs from the original CDJ 500. In 1996, the CDJ 500-2, or Mark II, is released to all established markets, adding an amber loop in button alongside of the loop out button. This is when we finally got the two loop buttons we know today. And in Japan, you guessed it, it was the CDJ 50-2, or Mark II. In 1997, the CDJ 500S is released to all established markets, featuring a more compact design, wider tempo range of ±16%, which is selectable between 10 and 16, and a new oil-dampened suspension that was more tolerant of vibrations. It was released in the United States as the CDJ 700S. Moving forward, the model names were unified globally afterwards. In 1998, the last of the 500 series, which is the CDJ 500-2 LTD, or CDJ 500 Mark II Limited Edition, released to all markets. It retains the original larger body of the CDJ 500. It introduced adjustable loop in and out times, as well as the improved jog wheel. It also retained the original tempo range of ±10%, unlike the CDJ 500S, which lets you select ±16%. Also, in 1998 was the introduction of the CDJ 100S, which was the first CDJ to come out that wasn't the color black. It was a smaller design compared to the 500 series, but slightly larger than the 500S. It introduced the first front-loading CD slot. It retains the 500S's oil-dampened suspension and the selectability to a wider tempo range, which is ±16%, but it did not have seamless loop. Instead, it introduced onboard effects like jet, zip, and wah. A fun fact about the CDJ 100S is that it was the longest-running CDJ in production from 1998 all the way to 2012, spanning a total of 14 years. Now, while these were all the first-generation CDJs that predated the iconic CDJ 1000 with vinyl emulation in 2001, they weren't the last of the traditional non-vinyl emulating jog wheel. The CDJ 200 came out in 2005 during the CDJ 1000 generation. The CDJ 200 is essentially what you get when you take a CDJ 100S and add some loop buttons and an LED ring around the jog, as well as some general improvements and updates all around. The 200 was basically a combination of first and second generation CDJs and was essentially the CDJ 500 in its best and final form, but not vinyl form. So setting the record straight, the birth of Pioneer DJ is attributed to the first CDJ, which was the CDJ 500 in October of 1994. If you want to see a good resource with all the facts, not just about Pioneer DJ gear, but about the majority, if not all, DJ gear, check out djresource.eu. It's a really great site with all the specs and info about gear, especially the ones that came out before the internet. And this way, you don't have to be fooled like I was with ongoing memes for DJ gear resource. They even have Pioneer's first DJ product documented, which was a mixer. No, I'm not talking about the DJM 500. I'm talking about the Pioneer MA62 from 1974, and I happen to have one right here. Let me know in the comments if you want to see a demo of this classic. Well, I hope you found the knowledge you seek. Till next time, the Force is with you, always.